Hi, and welcome to the Business Growth Journey with me, Nick Termini. We're excited to have Cole Sales on here today, founder of the Brand Repairman. I've been really excited to have him on the show. Gotten to know him the last 2 years, and this is going to be a good one. So, Cole, first, how do we know each other?
Thanks, Nick. No, I'm excited for the conversation today. And to start off, we've known each other for the last 2 years or so. I had reached out for some networking opportunities when I was thinking about starting Brand Repairman. And like they say, the rest is history.
That's awesome. So, Cole, I know you know the show quite well, and how we like to start out is we want to get to know you more. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? What were you interested in? And where did you first get into business? So to start out, Cole, where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Northland area of Kansas City. Born and raised in the area. Friends and family still are around, and I think that it's a great spot, and I think it's a great place, especially for businesses in and around the area. So that's kind of where I've started. To your question, where did I first get an interest in business? It was funny enough. It was in high school. I started my first business when I was a sophomore in high school, and the rest is history, as they say.
So you started your first business in high school. It's funny. Most people had lemonade stands or started a mowing company. What got you into business? What was your entry?
Yeah, so I started the sports and event photography business. So I was super into photography as a high school student. When I got to high school, I had the opportunity to get more involved from classes like newspaper and yearbook, and really found myself on the sidelines as my classmates were playing basketball or playing football on Friday nights. I was on the sidelines capturing those photos and documenting those memories for the newspaper, for the yearbook. And then ultimately, I started to get more requests from the athletic director to use those in some marketing materials, from the community newspaper to be able to publish those stories along with some photos that I've taken. And then ultimately from parents. So there was a clear demand there, and I was having the time of my life as a high school student, spending it on the sidelines and then the dugouts with a bunch of friends, and that's really kind of how it all started.
So, Cole, what do you think the first time somebody actually paid you for what your services were?
Yeah, it's one of those things you never forget, right? That feeling. I can remember it was the athletic director at the high school. Was a student, so I was walking through the hallways, and I made a pit stop to his office to pick up a check, and I was like, "Man, this is kind of cool. You're telling me I'm getting paid to go to school? This is fun." And yeah, like it was one of those things where it was just so much fun at that time in my life.
Yeah, it really is an amazing feeling the first time you start a company, you have an idea of what you think you want to do, and no matter how old you are, when somebody actually pays you for your services and your product, it's pretty wild. And then it's like, oh, well, let's speed this thing up and do more of
Right.
that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So, and what was it like? Like you mentioned, going to sporting events and the different lanes of customers that you had. What all did you have to do to get started once you realized, okay, I have pictures, I've taken these pictures, and people want them. What all did you have to dive into to continue to have a company?
Yeah. So at the beginning, it was one of those things where I was taking photos for the newspaper and the yearbook. And then when I first got approached by the athletic director, who had sent out a weekly newsletter and was looking for some images to include in that. And early on, it was one of those things where, okay, I would take the photos at the events, in the evenings and on the weekends, and I would edit them in the spare time that I had, or overnight. And then I would take them to the athletic director's office once or twice a week and give him the latest and greatest files. And he would include those in his newsletter. But I think something that I, realized really quickly is like, hey, that's not really the most efficient or effective way to go about this. So was kind of thinking through, okay, how can I make this a little bit more efficient, like for me, and just for everybody involved? So ultimately ended up creating a website where both the athletic director, ultimately parents of the students that were participating in the athletics,
Mhm.
and then the editors of both the school and the local newspaper and the yearbook were able to download those, or buy them if they were so inclined.
Oh, that's awesome. So when you started out, did you download it to a drive and
Yeah,
take it?
exactly. Yeah. So it was a lot of maybe probably not the best process just starting out, but I think over time I kind of recognized that and worked to find ways to improve that. That's for sure.
So you're 15 years old and you figured out digital workflow.
Trying
That's
to.
pretty wild. That, and I mean, and setting the tone for talking about your career. That's a pretty amazing and awesome experience because you're able to recognize, hey, I need to figure out how to speed this up. but now I got to go learn something. You've always blown me away with how you can take an idea and bring it to life, and you do it very quickly. And so the figure it out demeanor and attitude that you always have, it was pretty evident very early, right?
Yeah, and I think it was one of those things where, working in and around, whether it be a camera or computers or websites, that stuff always has come natural to me.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, like, they don't want to mess with it. They don't want to touch it. So that's
Yep.
where it was like, hey, let's lean into this and see, what's possible.
Oh man, that's fun. So do you know about how many clients you ended up having when it was all said and done?
So yeah, so when I was in high school, the majority of the work was centered around sports and athletics. But I will say I branched out a little bit, did some senior photos, did a wedding or two. So by the time I graduated, I would say, gosh, I mean, I had probably taken, I mean, at that point, probably hundreds of different games, whether it's, basketball, football, all sorts of things and everything in between. But I would say I probably shot probably between 50 and 75 different sessions, whether that be senior photos, family photos, a wedding or two in the mix. It was a very wide variety. And I think that with that, I realized, okay, what do I really enjoy? And maybe what don't I really want to enjoy?
Yep.
What I enjoy, but also what I, did want to focus my time, effort, or resources into.
So what's making me laugh here, Cole, is the visual of a senior coming up to a sophomore asking to shoot your senior pictures.
Yeah, it was.
Hey, I know you do a great job. I mean, did that blow you away at first?
It did, but it was one of those things where it kind of made sense from like a client retention perspective, because
Oh yeah.
I was on, I was in the dugouts taking photos of, let's say, the baseball team. Typically, in your varsity, squad, you're going to have the juniors and the seniors. So it was literally, those were the clients that I was trying. Like, I didn't think about this at the point, but at the time, but it was just kind of a natural progression of, okay, like, I can start to identify whose photos or who the target's at. Their parents are already looking at my website and downloading images. How can I, offer the opportunity to take their senior photos? That's just kind of the cycle that it ran.
Oh man, I mean, 15-year-old talking client retention is a beautiful thing, man. Awesome. So, and then as you graduated high school, did you keep the photography company going, or where did you go from here?
Yeah, so I didn't know. So I really enjoyed photography, but as I kind of stepped away and graduated from high school, I kind of left that behind, quite honestly. But I will say that the interest in business and marketing continued. So I graduated and went to MCC Maple Woods here locally, compliments of the A+ program in the Kansas City area, and then ultimately graduated after those first 2 years and went to Northwest Missouri State and graduated with a marketing degree.
Awesome. And I'm also a fellow Bearcat, Cole.
Yep,
So
there you go.
Northwest Missouri State, as you were going through college, from Maple Woods to Northwest Missouri State, were you working, or were you a full-time student, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was, working full time and going to school full time. So it was one of those setups where I was working full time during the day, and then in the evening, typically almost every weekday night, I would be going to classes to learn, whether that is a marketing class, a promotions class, advertising, or business. So it was really kind of a neat setup because I was learning in the evenings, and then I could go apply that in real life at my position. Throughout college, I worked at a company called Pro Athlete.
Yep.
They're a local e-commerce company. They sell sporting goods and merchandise online, and had the time of my life working there throughout college. That's for sure.
And what was your role there? And actually, let's back up a second, Cole. So you're going to college full-time at night while working a full-time job.
Yeah.
Have you always had this kind of work ethic? Where does this come from?
Yeah, I think so. Like, looking back, I think that I've always, going back to even high school, I went to school during the day, and then in the evenings and the weekends, I was spending it at sporting games and sporting tournaments.
Yep.
Transition to high school, I was doing a very similar thing. Or transition to college, I was doing a very
Yep.
similar thing. And I think that looking back, it's 100% always been something that I enjoy the work that I do, and when I do it, I want to go all in, and that's
Yep.
exactly how I do it.
Awesome. So, okay, you're working a pro athlete now. What's your role there? And going from having your own company and starting your own company, from realizing the opportunity where there's a shortage in supply and the demand is there. What is it like going from there to working at pro athlete while you're working through?
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I was hired on to be what they call a memory officer. So I was the first person to fill that position, and basically what they did is they hired me to document the cool things that were going on around the company. So they were a smaller organization of about 50 people, and they ran e-commerce websites. But you would never guess it if you went and toured their facility. They have a full-time chef that cooks all the employees breakfast and lunch. They have a personal trainer and a gym and a swimming pool and all this sort of stuff. And it really kind of opened my eyes from an employee and from like an employee standpoint of like, hey, this is not, the typical 9 to 5.
Yeah,
So I got to learn behind the scenes. I worked hand in hand with a lot of the executives there at the time, and really kind of dove right in. Initially my position was to take photos of the employees and the company culture and document all that sort of stuff. But it quickly expanded beyond that, where I was, designing the company website and running social media, shooting video of different events and community engagements and all sorts of stuff. And it was really neat because I wasn't stuck in one silo. I was able to kind of branch out and really kind of focus and test the skill set that I had.
that's pretty awesome. So, what was the best meal you had that was prepared by the chef there?
Yeah,
That
all
sounds
sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff. At that point of my life, like straight out of college, you always hear that, college kids are, eating on ramen noodles and rice and all this sorts of stuff. But you go to work and you have a chef that can cater you breakfast and lunch. Like it's just phenomenal. And I think that, looking back, I'm like, man, it'd be nice if I still had him around. That's for sure.
oh, that's great. So, most people's exposure to starting in the working world is, go to high school, have some like my first job was
Sure.
Parks and Rec, weed eating softball fields, 8 hours a day, all day. It was a great time. But if you look at yours, you were able to start your own company, learn how to learn in a direction to grow a company, and then go to what sounds like a culture first company in pro athlete versus like a traditional 9 to 5 or part-time job where it's kind of show up, do the work. Like that's a totally different experience and exposure. How did that open your brain as you started growing your career?
Absolutely. I think it had me realize and to kind of take a step back and realize, okay, what do I want to do and what's important to me when I look for kind of future positions or future clients. And I think that, there's all sorts of jobs out there, but if you don't find a job that you enjoy or that at the end of the day you can tolerate, I think that you're wasting your time, quite honestly. So for me, I think it was really more of kind of guardrails of, okay, this is, the perimeters that I had at pro athlete. I really liked it. How, when I'm thinking through that kind of next step in my career progression, what elements of this position or this company or this environment do I want to
Yep.
take? And I think that I definitely thought through that. And I think that after I left pro athlete, I went to a very large company, and I think that there were some similar aspects, but they're different at the end of the day.
All right. So you graduate from Northwest Missouri State and you've had, I mean, just incredible work experience to get
Yeah.
started. It's a lot of people don't really open their brain as they're doing their entry level jobs because it's, task fulfillment, go
Sure.
home, right?
Yeah.
And so, you were able to learn how to critically think and grow and, kind of open up the guardrails, like you said, where the possibilities are a lot larger when you have that kind of exposure. So from college, what were you looking at in the next company and how you wanted to really get your career ramped up after college?
Yeah, so I think that, looking back, I've always kind of had an interest in sport. And I think that I was, mixing sport and marketing and communications and a little bit of advertising. Those were all kind of areas that I wanted to continue to focus in and kind of build my career around. So as I wrapped up my time at Pro Athlete, I had the opportunity to join Garmin International. So Garmin, they were based here in Kansas City, was
Yep.
able to join them as part of their trade show and event marketing team. So that was a really exciting next step for me because going from a company that was 50 employees to going to a company that has thousands in Kansas City alone, I think that was
Yep.
definitely a bit of a culture shock, but I think in a positive manner because I, had experienced what it takes to run a smaller organization. But once I got on foot at Garmin, I was like, man, like this is impressive, and this really opened my eyes to kind of what's possible.
Yep. And so as you got started, what was your first role?
So when I first started at Garmin, my position was on the trade show and event marketing team. I was a specialist. So that's kind of what I did. I specialized in trade show and event marketing. So my position was to plan trade shows and events through and for all of Garmin's key verticals. So Boston Marathon, some of the big boat shows, aviation shows, like all that sort of stuff that Garmin had an interest in because they were, selling smartwatches and GPS devices and all sorts of athletic technology. I think that my position was to make sure that those products and the services that they provided were best represented at those large trade shows and events. So I was planning on the front end. I was going on site and traveling the country to setting up those activations. And it was really kind of a full circle position. Definitely more of a show up, execute, and specialize. But I think that definitely kind of looking back needed that at that point.
Yeah. So how did you go from pro athlete to becoming a trade show expert?
Yeah, so I dabbled in a couple of events at Pro Athlete, and I'm really just kind of looking for that next step, right? So it spent a couple years at Pro Athlete. It was kind of looking for that next position, and I didn't have a ton of experience in trade shows and events. Like I mentioned, I had helped out with a couple here and there, but nothing on the scale that I was getting myself into at Garmin. I think that was really eye opening to me because what I did, but wanted to do that
Yep.
at a larger scale, and that certainly was an opportunity that I was granted when I got on site at Garmin.
So when you started at Garmin, did they have like a training or like different things, or did you just tag along and kind of see where there were opportunities to improve? Like what was it like just getting off the ground? It's such a massive company in a pretty key
Yeah.
role.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, our position was to make sure that Garmin was well represented at some of the largest events across the country. And I think a lot of the learning for me, or training, if you will, was hands-on. It's easier to explain somebody how to do something in trade shows and events than it is to be on site and physically doing
Yep.
it. So for me, it was the ability to get on site at large shows like CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, or like I mentioned, like the Boston Marathon, getting on site and figuring out, okay, how do I best project manage this? How do I set this up so it best reflects me, but also the organization that I represent?
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun.
What was the Boston Marathon like?
Man, it was, it's one of those events. Like almost all the events that I went to with Garmin were historic, or they were the largest events in those industries. And I think
Really?
that it was really cool just to be on site at something so iconic as the Boston Marathon. So yeah, I mean, it was an experience, that's for sure.
That's awesome. And so as you continue to move forward, did you have other roles at Garmin, or what's next on your path?
Yeah, so I stayed in that trade show and event marketing role for a couple of years. Unfortunately, COVID came to existence, and that kind of shut that down from a trade show and event perspective.
Yeah.
So then I was promoted into a retail marketing role. So kind of a similar situation where I was kind of leading the charge of Garmin's products and services at retail. So like retail for retailers like Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, Academy Sports, like some of the large kind of outdoor sporting goods retailers, in making sure that as Garmin would release a new product, that product would then hit the shelves and would be marketed the best it could to best represent the latest and greatest features and the selling benefits.
And what was the transition like from, going from something huge where it's a sensory overload like a
Yeah.
trade show,
Yeah.
to then designing how to work with big box stores and what their display and transactional flow will look like?
Yeah, so I think it was definitely different, but I would say there was a lot of similarities because I was kind of at the same time designing an environment for the customer. So trying to design a activation or a retail display that would attract customers to want to come, touch, and feel and learn more about
Yeah.
a specific product. So I think that it didn't exactly have all the pomp and circumstances a big trade show or event. But I think that there were a lot of similarities. And I think that that's what made the transition so easy for me, is because I could apply kind of a similar skill set or mindset, if you will, of, okay, this is how we did this at a trade show and event, but also take that same mindset of like, okay, so a shopper that's trying to buy a product or service, that personality or that message that we're communicating from a marketing standpoint needs to be a little bit different when we're, shopping for a product at Target versus shopping for a product at like a Dick's Sporting Goods environment. So that was kind of unique for me to be able to put that cap on and kind of think through, okay, how do we, change or alter that brand marketing and messaging depending on the environment?
Cool. This is a blast because you're able to see, like, started out, built essentially an e-commerce service site, right, for a
Yeah.
photography company. Then, a pro athlete starting out of capturing moments and celebrating people is what it sounded like. And now to, go into the big stage at Garmin of doing trade shows to then retail. That is an incredible array of experience, very early in your career. When you're able to look at, your understanding of marketing, consumer habits, and just getting to know people and communication, that's a pretty awesome start to a career to set the stage on the path you're on, right?
Absolutely. And I think that, I learned so much along the way. And I think I tried to put myself in positions where, I found the work interesting at the end of the day. And I think that for me, I wanted to, even to this day, I still want to continue to find work that is interesting to me, that challenges me. And I think that that's what makes working at the end of the day fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And in doing the podcast, I've heard a lot of different COVID stories. And, the trade show business is definitely one that got crushed during COVID, right?
Very true. It was one of those things where I was, planning events for thousands of people. And when you don't have thousands of people showing up, you're not selling or providing a service or knowledge about the products or services that you're representing. So it was one of those things where, man, yeah, it was a bummer. But I think that I learned a lot, and I think we all did, quite honestly, of how do you pivot
Yeah.
in that situation. So that was definitely a interesting one for sure.
So as you're in the retail role at Garmin, are you starting to look ahead, or did you have what was next in your journey from that point?
Yeah, so I had been in the event role for a couple of years at Garmin, then promoted to that retail role, and then, really wanted to get back to that event role. I really enjoyed kind of that aspect of it. So I actually had a conversation with a local organization here in the Northland area called eShipping, and they were looking for
Yep.
somebody to come in and build a smaller trade show program for their organization from scratch. So that was really interesting to me because I had done a few events here and there at Pro Athlete. I had done a ton of events at Garmin on a larger scale, and
Mhm.
they were looking for someone to kind of a mixture, to someone to come in to build that, to kind of think through, okay, again, what's the brand messaging? What do we have to offer to our customers? How can we best communicate that? And they were a very sales motivated organization. So I think that was an interesting opportunity for me because I hadn't had the opportunity to work so close to a sales team. And I think that was a very eye opening experience for me.
That's awesome. And so at this new role, were you able to apply a lot of the things from, previously that you've learned in your career and kind of mold them in a different way?
I was absolutely. And I think that there was a lot of opportunity with e-shipping because, similar to my role at Pro Athlete is, yes, I was here to focus on kind of one thing, but they had, the opportunity was there to stretch beyond that, to do more than just trade shows and events, to work on, the website, to work on internal communications, whatever it may be at the time. I think that there was a lot of opportunity for that. So that's what I really enjoyed about it. I wasn't going to work and doing the same thing every day. I was able to, challenge myself and be challenged by the team there. And I think that, we had a lot of fun and along the way.
So that brings up an interesting point, Cole. So a lot of people either in their career run to the challenge or they kind of try to find a safe place where it's not as challenging. It seems throughout, as we've been talking here, that you're continually looking for areas to grow and to be challenged in a way that you can add a new skill set or find a new way to make something even better. Like, could you talk to us just about your growth mindset and how, like, it sounds like you're a challenge hunter. Like you're out looking
Yeah.
for, something that's interesting to you, but ways to bring it together in a way that's a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that is something that's very true. I think that, I continue to seek out roles and companies that are looking for problems to be solved. And I think that, I've got an interesting skill set to bring to the table. And I think that for me, I think I'm always kind of looking for that next challenge, whether that be a full-time position or whether that be kind of a part-time or per project position. I think that the opportunities are out there locally. And I think that, for me, if I've got the time and the interest and the bandwidth, absolutely would love to continue to help out in those situations. And I think that I've done a good job at that looking back the last several years.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you're alluding to the Brand Repairman, Cole. So could you talk to us about when the Brand Repairman started to come to life and kind of your mindset and just what it's like getting that started with the experience that you've had in marketing, conventions, branding, just a full array of marketing experience.
Absolutely. So yeah, about a year and a half or so into my role at eShipping, I started to kind of think or kind of build the idea of building kind of a side gig slash business on the side. I had worked in brand marketing for several years now, at large
Yep.
companies, at small companies. And I realized, in all those situations, there was always an opportunity to do more or to have more done. And I think that, with, all size companies, there's always a need for more resources. And I think too often, a lot of times those resources come at a hefty price tag. Came up with the idea and rolled out Brand Repairman in January of 2024, and really created it to be a resource for local businesses, organizations to be able to rely on to help and support them from a brand marketing perspective, focusing on that brand. So that brand development, anything from like a logo or the strategy or the messaging behind it to websites, content, events, all that sort of stuff. And really kind of sold myself as a one-stop shop to be able to help businesses and organizations without the hefty price tag of a traditional marketing agency or the ability to hire somebody full-time and to be able to manage them.
Cole, it's awesome stuff because, a lot of companies try to either do everything themselves or they don't even know where to start to have the right resources. Like we talked about earlier in the podcast, you have a unique ability to be able to take somebody's vision and where they want something to go and bring it to life. And, it sounds like, and I know as well, that's what the Brand Repairman does.
And I think that was kind of the concept, right? I think
Right?
that, friends and family members, yeah, I think absolutely. I think that, and that's kind of the idea behind the business is, there are businesses, both big and small, public and private, and all sorts of sizes and industries, but they're all kind of in the same situation where, marketing in 2025 is so in demand because there's so many different aspects and areas of it. You've got to have a website. You've got to, think about your email marketing. You've got to think through social media, all these different things coming to pulling at the strings of the resources. And I think oftentimes there's not enough resources to be able to go around. And I think that providing a service to be able to help with those or to help alleviate some of those resources or those time constraints, that's kind of the concept behind it. And to do so at a fraction
Yep.
of the cost.
That's awesome. And so, how did your entrepreneurial experience, play into this, right? Like as you've looked through your career and back to the photography company and then, the other opportunities you've had at other companies, have you always kind of had that twinkle in your eye towards starting your own company and being able to build it, to what your vision is and also be able to grow, in the ways that you want to grow?
I have, yeah. I think that, looking back, definitely, in high school, like I probably didn't go out to, I didn't, envision of going out and starting a business in high school. But I think that, it was just kind of one of those things that I fell into and I kind of got that bitten by the bug, if you will. And I think that I've always kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then, when I started to recognize kind of some problems and a potential solution, I think that's kind of where the idea and the concept behind Brand Repairman was started.
Cole, the entrepreneurial bug is a bug bite that doesn't go away, right? And some advice I got from one of my mentors from basically my whole life is if you're wanting to start your own company now, it doesn't matter if it's in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's never going to go away. If you don't try it and at least know what it's all about, and if it's something you want to do and grow in, great. And if it's not for everybody, so it's pretty interesting that you've had these different touch points throughout your career where it kept getting clearer and clearer the direction that you wanted to go.
Well, and I think it was one of those things. And I think it was one of those things where I always kind of knew that I think it was one of those things where I always knew I wanted to do it. But, it was one of those things where, and if I launch it, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be right. And, looking back, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be 100% accurate or right. But just doing it, putting it out to market and taking it to see what the response is, I think that was really kind of the push that I really needed. And, the ability to kind of just put myself out there. And when I launched it in January of 24, I think that that was, definitely one of the things that I needed to test it to see, is this, feasible? Is this realistic? Is this needed by local businesses and organizations? Turns out it is. And I think that they've had a lot of the strategic direction behind what I have kind of molded and revised Brand Repairman into since then. So I credit a lot to them.
That's good stuff because I think a lot of people get stuck on the how to start and then how am I going to make it perfect, that it's over analysis or paralysis by analysis where they literally just can't even see taking the first step because they're so worried about the failure component. And like you've kind of talked about it during the show, starting a company, it's not going to be perfect. And the first win or failure leads to the next. And you just got to keep getting up and putting one foot in front of the others. Kudos to you for continuing to do that. And then, how's the Brand Repairman grown and evolved since, the concept of wanting to get it started and then, kind of continuing to grow it as a side hustle and other career opportunities that you've had?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a wild ride, quite honestly, because I had the idea and I knew that, because I had been, doing some freelance work here and there, but really hadn't, been doing a lot of it seriously, or had a lot of it. And I think that by creating kind of the Brand Repairman idea, it really served as a personal portfolio of work that I've done and collected throughout the years. And I think that for
Yep.
me, I really needed something to be able to fall back on and say, hey, here's all the cool stuff that I've done. Here's how I've done it. I would love to be able to help you out. And I think that over time, it was just more of an organic conversation. And I think, funny enough, like as time has progressed, I, get emails and texts and phone calls from former employers because they're looking for somebody, because they need somebody to jump in and help, whether that be a website or whether that be a marketing campaign or a trade show, an event that they've got coming up that they need some extra hands on deck for. I think that's kind of the idea behind Brand Repairman. And I think that, I can't do or be everything for everybody or every organization, but what I can do is help kind of jump in and help provide value where I can and where I can see it. And if I can't, I'm going to direct you to somebody that can. So I think that, the Kansas City marketing and communications community is very tight knit. It's very close. And I think that being involved in that kind of industry, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to both build relationships, but also build partnerships in business. And I think at the end of the day, I think that there's so much opportunity if you continue to play nice in business, especially with those that you're competing with for business each and every day.
So you just dropped a lot of gold there, Cole. So if part of like getting started in your own company and growing as a person is the belief in yourself, right? And so as you're seeing your portfolio come together, that's evidence. You're actually seeing your career come together in real time, where it's like, holy cow, like this is good stuff. And you're getting feedback from the companies you've worked with. And it's really an amazing journey as you go through that to realize like, holy cow, I think we got something here. Did you ever go through imposter syndrome or anything where you were a little overwhelmed by the opportunities that you wanted to jump into?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think we all do, to be clear. I think that especially in, the digital age of where we are in business in 2025, we can, look at competitors or look at other people in our industry that are doing great work. And I think that there's a lot of great work out there. And it may see that, their work or their output is so much better than mine. But what you don't see is the fact that they've been in business for 25 or 35 years. Like there's
Yep.
so much opportunity for comparison out there. But I think at the same time, for me specifically, looking at, it is closing in on the end of 2025 at this point. How far have I come in the last year and a half of building the business? It's pretty incredible.
That's awesome. So how have you grown through, just like you said, how much you've grown this year in business, but how much do you look back at reflection to see where you've gone to then look at where you are now to where you want
to? Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where, looking to where I am now versus where I was when I started, completely different. I think that we continue to revise and refine a lot of the different materials, and the look and the feel of the work continues to increase in quality. Some of the stuff you'd show me that I did when I first started, I'd be like, don't show me that. Don't put that online. Like that doesn't need to be seen. But, it was one of those things where that's where you start. Like you've got to start somewhere. And I think that even if the quality isn't, the best looking back, it was the best that I could do at the time. And I think that that's what has continually got me to where I am today and continues to, grow in terms of the organizations that I can partner with, the organizations that trust me to be able to help them and lend a hand in their organization.
So as you were talking about, we kind of got into evidence of the work you've done and how you've grown throughout your career. But you also mentioned, kind of an abundant mindset when you're talking about the marketing community in Kansas City, or just marketing community as a whole, where, there's enough to go around for everybody and able to learn and grow together and find different ways to collaborate and work together and grow. How have you continued to have an abundant mindset and then continue to foster and build those relationships? Because, the relationship component, I think, is where people either get in their own head of going to a scarcity mindset versus, being abundant where there's always opportunities, to go around. How have you continued to grow in your mindset as you've gotten more exposure, gotten more involved in the marketing community, and built relationships?
Yeah, I think that, going back to what I said previously about partnerships, I think that, that is one of the biggest opportunities and ways to build a personal portfolio, but also a great business at the end of the day. And I think that for me, I've really kind of thrown myself into the marketing and communications and advertising communities right here in Kansas City. And I think that what we're seeing more and more of is there's a lot of us out there, and there's a lot of us that continue to work our full time job, but are also kind of playing with building this thing on the side and want to
Yep.
continue to do more and more of that. And I think that as we all kind of rely on each other and help lift each other up and send each other work or referrals, I think that we're only helping each other in at the end of the day the greater good of the community.
So here's what I've learned as a business owner, and I'd love your take on it. Where there's, all the head trash that people have. I know I've had, before that, when you get out and are actually in the business community and you start your own company and you're trying to figure everything out all at once all the time, and then you learn to break it down and how to navigate that. But as a whole, I think people really want to see you do well and like are cheering for you and vice versa, right? Like anybody I've ever worked with or come across, I want to see them win and grow in the ways they want. And how have you experienced that? And what's been your take on
Absolutely. And I think that, at the end of the day, there's plenty of work to go around. And I think that what we're seeing more and more of is there's organizations out there that are open and willing to bring on a contractor, bring on a freelancer versus hiring somebody full time. And I think that for certain situations, I think that, either I or somebody that I refer may or may not be the best fit for a position. So I think having a tight knit community to be able to then refer somebody else or to say, hey, I know this individual specializes in this aspect.
it?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of value there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as you're growing the Brand Repairman, are you still where are you at in your full-time job space?
Yeah, so I'm still working full time as well as growing Brand Repairman in a part time basis on the side. So I work full time at a organization that is based in Lawrence, Kansas, the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. So funny enough, it all goes back to trade shows and events. So I help
Yep.
oversee a large trade show and event for the golf industry. I think things come full circle, but I think that I had the opportunity to freelance for them several years back, and they had an opening, and it all goes back to those partnerships and those connections. They were looking for somebody about a year or so at this point to fill a position on their team, and I had a connection there. I had kind of the skill set, and I had some experience to show for it, and that just kind of made that conversation a little easier when I was brought on board. Definitely a fun gig. I enjoy everything that I do at that organization. It's in the nonprofit space, as I mentioned, in the golf industry. So again, working in trade shows, working in golf, like working, there's a lot of similarities between where I went to, when I was in high school to taking those positions kind of throughout my career. And I think that I tried to set myself up for success in doing that.
So man, that's awesome. It sounds like fun too. Like what are some of the events that you've been able to work?
Yeah, so I help oversee their annual conference and trade show. So it's an event that attracts typically between 13 and 15,000 people a year to a different city across North America. So last year in the spring of 2025, we were in San Diego. In the spring of 2026, we're going to be in Orlando and celebrating the organization's 100th anniversary. So there's a lot of really cool things that have come out of that. The position, I would have never imagined that I would be able to, plan a party or a reception on top of a USS Navy warship on the San Diego Bay, or get ready to plan a celebratory block party that celebrates 100 years of an organization. Like there's so many details and so much that goes into that, and I think that that's really kind of where I find myself kind of exceeding because that's the stuff that I'm interested in. That's the stuff that I enjoy, and I think that the position currently, I have the ability to kind of put a marketing layer on top of that, and I think that's just kind of the best of both worlds for me.
So Cole, what's it like? Like if you're going to break down some of the things that you have to consider
Yeah.
in mapping out an event for 15,000 people on the other side of the country, like what are some of the things you have to go through? That sounds like a lot of logistics and a lot of things to figure out.
It is. And I think there is a lot that goes into that. And I think that that's one of the things that people don't necessarily see. But I think that that's where I enjoy being. I enjoy being on kind of the behind the scenes team that puts that together. So, when you're thinking of bringing so many people together, you've got to find a space for that. So there's only so many, convention centers across the country that can hold that many people. And then when you think about that, you're like, man, okay, you've got 15,000 people in town. Where are they going to stay? Where are they going to eat? Like all of those sort of questions, you got to make sure you take care of those situations. So typically it's working a lot with the local convention center and visitor bureaus across in the specific cities that we're working with for each year. But a lot of it is doing long range planning because, our event typically takes place in February of each year. But there's a lot of other organizations and associations that put on events every year as well. So we're all kind of competing for different space at different times. We got to make sure that we're doing our best to plan and do a lot of forward planning ahead of time. And you think of that and you're like, oh, okay, so you're probably planning like the next year or two, right? No, I mean, we're in a position where we're planning 8 to 10 years out of what city we're going to be in because we have to put, a hold or a reservation on hold for the meeting space at the large convention centers or at the premier hotels because there's a lot of demand and I think there's only so much supply at the end of the day.
Wow. So is there any way you could share any bloopers or stories that just a crazy scenario that came up? Because, in any event I've ever been part of, you have a beautiful plan and then there's always something. So where you're able to have like how do you have the mental flexibility to know you're going into this? You put in years of preparation, feel like you've dotted every I, crossed every T, and then there's a thunderstorm that has lightning,
Yeah.
or something like that. How do you navigate that? And do you have contingency plans for everything, or what's that look like at an event that scale?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where you always have to come up with a backup plan and have a backup for your backup. I think that there's so much opportunity for room for error just because there's so much going on and so many people involved. And I think that by doing a good job of planning on the front side, you can do so much, but until you get on site, you're not looking at variables such as you mentioned the weather or space or okay, what do I do if we reach max capacity at this venue? Are we going to turn people away that have already paid for this experience? Like, what are we going to do? So I think that I can't pinpoint a specific example or a blooper, if you will, but I think that we try to do our best to be able to kind of prepare for what ifs because it's not if, it's when. And I think that that's one of the biggest things, especially in the event industry, you've got to be prepared for. And I think that, especially in, 2025, there's so much going on and you have to be prepared for it. And I think that there's going to be things out there that I'm going to be challenged with and others that are going to be challenged with that aren't going to be prepared for. But I think you can be prepared, but I also think that you can be prepared in terms of how you respond. And I think that, being in a position where you're kind of thinking through everything in an efficient and effective manner and, what makes the most sense for the attendee experience or the betterment of the organization, I think that there's a lot of things at stake.
So it basically comes down to being battle tested and prepared. And so through time, does it seem like because of the experience you've had that you're able to go, okay, so this has happened before, here's how we're going to handle it, right? Like, this sounds like one of the jobs where experience does matter.
I think so, absolutely. And I think that, there's definitely been opportunities where I can bring into the conversation of, hey, when I did this at Garmin or when I did this at Pro Athlete, like this is kind of an idea to bring to the table. And I think it's been nice to be able to partner with my current full-time organization, but also some of my freelance clients, hey, they're willing to kind of challenge the experience and make sure that we can do everything we can to be able to bring new and unique ideas to the table. And that's, at the end of the day, that's, the best organizations you want to work for is because that's when you can start to get creative. That's when you can start to elevate things and really make sure those attendees that are in coming to your event walk away and think, wow, like they really pulled out all the stops.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Is the experience you create and how you make people feel, whether it's a trade show or marketing or your clients, right?
I think so. And I think that, that's kind of the perfect mix of kind of why I, work with a wide variety of different businesses and organizations. Like I have worked in the last year or so with a local restaurant and they, had just opened up, but they needed to design a logo. They needed to design some interior and exterior signage and a menu. And like, they wanted to do all that stuff, but they didn't really have the bandwidth or the capability or the knowledge of how to do that. And I think that that's exactly kind of why I positioned Brand Repairman to be kind of that, one-stop shop of, hey, I can help you out. I can do this. And you don't have to hire somebody full-time. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars on an agency. Like, let me help you.
Yep. And so how has technology, that is now moving at a vastly accelerated rate, changed, how you interact with clients, whether it's in your full-time job or as the brand repairman, and what do you do to continue to stay ahead and grow as technologies? I mean, it's moving so fast. 2 years ago, AI was just like at the entry level of conversation. Now it's part of everyday business. How do you continue to grow and just the technology space.
It's absolutely. I think it's moving faster than we can keep up with. And I think that that's both a unique opportunity, but also a challenge, right? I think
Yep.
that there's a lot of different opportunities out there. There's different softwares, there's different, types of programs that you can bring on board to be able to help you speed up in which you can deliver outcomes for your business or your organization. For me, I think that, I've been fortunate where stuff like that has always kind of come naturally to me. I understand that, for others, maybe it doesn't, and that's okay. And I think that for me, I think that that's kind of, again, going back to the whole brand repairman piece is, I want to be able to help people because that's, it comes natural to me. And I understand that that's the last thing that they want to do is try to figure out how to build a website or how to, create a marketing campaign. And I think that that's exactly kind of where I position myself is, I am, I am Cole. I am the brand repairman. I'm not, a team of 15 people.
Yep.
But I think that there's some flexibility there in, an organization or a brand that needs help or assistance, the value that they can bring by bringing somebody on like me versus hiring or bringing on a full-time employee or an agency. I think there's opportunities out there. And I think that I found a niche need where I can provide a value.
100%. So Cole, could you talk a little bit about, when you started the Brand Repairman, those, websites, some branding, could you just talk about like some of the projects that you're able to share and, the diversity in things that you've done? I mean, so, we talk, just to do a little recap here. We started with photography and we've covered 15,000 person trade shows on the other side of the country. So in between all that, like what are some of the things you've done to help clients as the brand repairman?
Absolutely. I think it's a wide variety. And I think that what's nice about it is I've got some flexibility to expand beyond kind of what clients are looking for. And I think that typically when it comes to some of the work that I do, it typically falls into four categories: brand, website, content, and events. And I think that looking back, that's kind of the skill sets that I've kind of collected throughout the years. And I think that, for example, I've worked with a local appliance company. I helped them redesign their logo after they've been in business for 65 years and really kind of helped to reimagine kind of their messaging and the look and the feel of their organization. And that kind of led into, okay, let's rewrap our company vehicles so when we drive around town, people can recognize and realize that, hey, we're here local, we're in your backyard, we're in your neighborhood, we want to provide service. On the flip side, I've worked for organizations that maybe aren't so local. So I've, partnered with a couple of associations that are throughout the United States, and they're looking for somebody on call to be able to help manage their website, manage their newsletter, manage their social media. And I think that there's a lot of variety in terms of the level of support that I can provide because, yes, it may be a one project thing and that's okay. Like I don't necessarily set myself out there to make a bunch of money based on retainers. I only want to be able to provide value on what both benefits the organization and what they're looking for at the end of the day.
So Cole, working with, you have a tough job because working with a company like you said, it's been around for 65 years and wants to reimagine their logo and how they're represented in the community. That's a really sensitive topic in being able to navigate it where it's endearing to the stakeholders of the company and the customer, where you're able to understand all sides and help it showcase in the best way who they are and what they represent. And so as you go through that, how do you do that? Because that's an incredibly difficult position.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just listening to what they're, what they do, what they're looking for, and how, in my position, how it can help. I think that example of the local appliance company, that's right. They've been in business for 65 years. People knew their name, but they were really in a position where they were looking to upgrade and elevate the look and feel of their organization. And I think that, that was an organization where, their great grandparents had built the organization. So there was there was family involved. There's generational, there's family involved. There's a lot of emotion there. And that's fair. Like that, it's clear and fair to be able to respect that. But at the same time, I'm working with business owners and organizations that are just starting out. They don't know what they like. They're just figuring out kind of the product and service. They don't exactly know sometimes what name they're going to go with. So helping them kind of figure that out, helping figure out, okay, what's the look and the feel going to look like? Who's their target customer, the market, like all that sort of stuff. And I think that that's what I really like about it is that no day is the same. And I think that I have the ability and the flexibility to be able to work for organizations that are just starting out, but also those that have been around for decades. And I think that that's what's really neat and really exciting for me at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. So Cole, in these positions, right? Like you're able to gather information about their company. Here's what your customers are saying. Here's, how you see fit in the community. But a lot of times, sometimes it's harder to see what it is that you really want or what it needs to be when you're the closest to it. So when you own a company, sometimes, an outside perspective comes in and offers up like, hey, here's a gap, or here's a hole in your game. And you have a really eloquent way of being able to help people navigate through what they think they want to what they really need at that time. And so, in leading them to success, that's something I've always throughout my career studied and tried to grow in, is how do you lead people to success when maybe they don't realize this is what the first and second step need to be? How do you continue to do that? Like you mentioned, listening and being sensitive to, maybe it's generational, maybe they're a startup, maybe they're a massive organization that everybody has a different need or want. But how do you continue to lead these companies to success when they reach out to you?
Yeah, I think it's a wide variety. I think that, some organizations, when they reach out to me, they're looking for somebody, on a very, per project based situation. They've got a trade show coming up in 90 days and they need help to be able to execute that. On the flip side, I get calls sometimes that organizations are looking for somebody to be able to come in and to be able to help set strategy and help kind of think through, okay, what are the next steps? Or, they may think that, they really need to double down on social media or email marketing, but their website's not the best, and you should probably spend some time on that before you dive your resources and your time into what's then going to drive people to your website. So I think that I approach it in a manner where yes, sometimes the businesses and organizations have an idea of what they want to do, but to your point, coming in from the outside looking in, I can, help identify them, maybe make some recommendations of, hey, maybe you don't need to spend so much time on this area of business because, I'd mentioned earlier, there's so much going on in, marketing communications and just running a business day to day anymore. Sometimes the initial, gut check of, hey, I need to spend more time or money or resources on this, it might not actually be, what the problem is. And I think that that's, where I come in from an outsider perspective to be able to come in and ask the questions and to, remove all of the barriers and kind of the internal kind of knowledge. I think that for me coming in to be able to help challenge the process has been incredibly helpful.
Yes. And your ability to do it in a way that, isn't always comes off as in the best interest and the spirit of where people want to work with you. So, man, this is good stuff. So as you look at the Brand Repairman, what does the future look like for the Brand Repairman?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that I don't know, quite honestly. I think that I'm continuing to build it on the side.
You don't have a crystal ball right there?
No.
Oh, come on. I was expecting a totally calculated answer.
Not quite. It's one of those things where, I kind of built it on the side and I continue to see myself building it on the side and having fun with the clients that, have the opportunity to trust me to be able to help support them and their business and their services. And really just do good business at the end of the day. And I think that that's really what I kind of see it continuing to become. Maybe one day, does it become a full-time gig? I don't know. Maybe it does. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to just continue to do what I'm doing. And I think that providing value at the end of the day has already, to this point, I mean, I'm just a year and a half in, has provided a lot of value and I think a lot of credibility to what I can do and who I can do it for. And I think that continuing to double down on that is, I think, what you're going to continue to see and helping local businesses, organizations out, to the point where, like, you maybe don't have to hire a full-time employee, or you don't have to go out there and hire a six-figure marketing agency. There's other options out there. And I think that that's exactly what I'm trying to do to position myself as that other option.
Yeah. And as you've grown in that space of helping fill gaps and help, lead companies to success, what is it like working with you versus somebody on Fiverr and trying to vet them out and figure out, I've personally gone through that where it's like, okay, I'm going to try this for a flyer or website update. And I think I have a pretty good idea of what the project's going to look like. And then all of a sudden there's all this back and forth and there's not clarity on the vision. Like, have you come across that where people are frustrated from trying to outsource and figure everything out themselves, where they realize in working with you, first you understand their goals and the essence of where they are and where they want to go. Like what has that been like?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, I try to approach it with kind of a overarching kind of thought process. Okay, what are they looking for? But also at the end of the day, like how does this one project fit into kind of the goals and the aspirations of their organization from
Yep.
a big picture point of view? And I think that like coming into that with that approach, I think that, I've got the opportunity to not only help them out with this situation, but then potentially, over time to then become called, when they're looking for something else down the line. And I think that that's exactly kind of the position that I've tried to put myself in, is to become kind of that on-call marketing partner. You don't need to staff somebody full time, like just to have somebody and have a resource that you can call when you need the help. And I think that that's exactly kind of what I'm trying to do. Just see more and more
Well,
of
and
that.
so like you've mentioned, on a per project basis is an option you provide. But as companies grow, it's like, and I've seen this for many years, where a company goes and works with a marketing company.
Yeah.
They have their original game plan, and then at some point there's a level of dissatisfaction. And I think a lot of times, whether it's the owner or the marketing manager within the company doesn't really even understand what the goal is, that we're trying to get results and leads and
Yep.
create revenue and profit. And they kind of get lost in the fray of the wording on a social media post. But what I've seen is when you're able to build trust and, projects that lead to bigger projects that lead to, more, dynamic relationship, there's a lot of room for growth where it builds trust. Have you seen that, where somebody's like, man, Cole, the brand repairman's easy to work with. They knock this out, actually help me understand something better of what I'm trying to do. And then now we have other opportunities where we can grow together, right?
Absolutely. And I think that, part of kind of my approach is, coming into it with more of kind of an educational background. Like, yes, I, have the knowledge to be able to do this, but I also want to be able to help provide the team value and to create, educational resources and training so they can then, potentially do it themselves. Because I think that, I can't necessarily be at all places at once. And I think that I can only help a certain amount of time and a certain amount of clients. And I think that, if I can provide value in one instance of helping them, develop a flyer, develop a logo or a brand guideline or whatever that may be in question, develop that and then give them the resources to then potentially do it themselves. I think there's a lot of value in there because yes, they're hiring somebody from the outside looking in, but they're also bringing in another set of eyes to then help train them as a different perspective. So I think that, to your point, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I think that, I have been fortunate to be able to work with clients and customers and say, hey, like, you've kind of knocked it out of the park. You've really done a good job of, from the outside looking in. Like, we didn't really give you a ton of resources or, options. And I think that what you provided, they feel like, I get all the time that, they feel like, hey, this is spot on to, what we think our brand looks and feels like. This is exactly, this is exactly what we're looking for. And I think that at the end of the day, that's exactly why I do it.
When we started working together, that was, I remember thinking, like, is Cole in my brain? Like, how did he turn what we talked about into something better than what I could have came up with? And it does go back to, I think you do an incredible job of leading, clients and companies you work with to success. So Cole, to wrap up, what are some words of wisdom that you would offer somebody that's either starting a company or as part of, growing a company to the next level?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot, there's a lot of advice out there. And I think that there's so much, but I think that, oftentimes it's just starting with the basics. And that's, kind of a good place to start is with the basics. When a business owner or organization reaches out to me and they need help, I start there. I help, okay, what's your message? What's your organization? What are you doing? And how can we help either clarify that or promote it more and more. And I think that that's exactly, again, what I've been fortunate enough to do with a handful of clients throughout the last couple of years, is to be able to help them do that. And I think that that's really something that's fulfilling for me. And I think that at the end of the day, it's supportive in for their business and their organization, because that takes one less thing that they have to lose hours of sleep over each night because, the website's not up or the website's down or all this sort of stuff. When I partner with people, I, typically tell them like, hey, I'm on call for you. So if things happen or if there's something breaks, like, let me know and I can help you out. And that's exactly what I position myself to be.
Everybody wants to work with somebody that cares, right? And I think, you always show that you go the extra mile to make sure things get done in a way that, make people feel like you're on their side. And I think that's a quality that, some are great at, like you, and others that's where a lot of frustrations can be created. But what I'll say is, and being able to look at your website and see some of the companies you work with, it pumps me up when I'm driving down the road and see, here's the Brand Repairman, a couple of their projects, because I've noticed that they continue to get bigger and expand. So, great work on all the things you've been doing. And to wrap up, how would people find the Brand Repairman, and what specifically would they reach out for you on to get started, and what would that?
Yeah, no, websites out there online at brandrepairman.com. I'm also, of course, on all the social media platforms at Brand Repairman. And it's one of those things where, if you're, on the fence of, thinking about hiring somebody full time, or you're struggling to hire somebody to be able to support your business or your organization, that's kind of where I come in. It's, I don't typically do retainer projects. I don't offer retainers for my clients. I typically start with per project situations and help them from the ground up and improve, the service and the experience, and then, earn their trust in business throughout. So I think that, always open to a conversation to learn more about a local business and organization and how I can help.
Awesome. Well, Cole, thank you for being on the business growth journey, man. It's awesome having you.
Appreciate it, Nick. Really enjoyed our conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you.